My thesis is that Western civilization is suffering from the negative effects of the neoliberal status quo, right? Atomization, digital addiction, extreme wealth inequality, surveillance capitalism, so on and so forth. The populist left, the economic left, is poised to be able to ascend in power and influence because they could offer real solutions to these problems, right? A digital bill of rights, sovereign wealth fund, taxing capital gains at the same rate as income. I want all of those things to happen, okay? But I think the biggest problem facing the left is not the right-wing media ecosystem of Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and Charlie Kirk. The biggest problem facing the left is the woke mind virus. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
So we're going to start off like that, huh?
We're starting off with the
Not
woke
even going to introduce
mind virus.
my views.
Introduction is in the description. The summary, the one-sentence summary is in the description. What do you think, Tony?
Well, say to start, I mean, it is important to say where I'm coming from because a lot of lefties, whenever you critique the woke, they assume you must be a right-winger because they live in an echo chamber and haven't talked to anyone in real life. And if they did, they would see that you don't have to be a right-winger to see what is going on with the woke, which, let's be honest, I think is kind of dying.
Yes, I think so. It's moving in that direction, right? The Vivek Chibbers, the Joshua Citarellas.
I think they're all late to the party, but I'm glad they're there.
Well, yeah, but the point is there are definitely a lot of prominent left-wing figures, Norman Finkelstein, criticizing wokeism, and it's on its way out. But it doesn't change the fact that, if anything, that's evidence for the degree to which wokeism and the woke mind virus is weighing down the left. And as a leftist yourself, how do you feel about it?
Okay, so I should maybe say where I'm coming from. So, like,
Go ahead.
I'm definitely like a person on the left, but I never describe myself as a leftist because I hate the label.
Okay.
You think about it, when do you ever meet a right-winger who calls themselves a rightist? Because what unites the right? There's such disparate factions. You have monarchists, libertarians, Christian nationalists, fascists. A rightist? What does that even mean? You know, a leftist is pretty weird too. It's like there's these very different people, but they are all united by this kind of like Trump derangement syndrome or some kind of obsession with stopping the right and uniting. They say there's not enough left unity. I think it's the opposite, honestly. The left suppresses its contradictions and as a result has a kind of pseudo unity more than the right has, dare I say, you know. I think the right's actually less unified than the left is.
At this point, yeah, and especially once Trump is gone.
Yeah, because they just have a demagogue to rally behind, but they
Correct.
don't ideologically, they spar with each other more
Oh, yes.
than I see. I mean, leftists spar with each other, but at the end of the day, they all unite around Joe Biden. So the left unites around somebody who is like not even a leftist.
Right, just a counter to Trump.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, all right, well, it sounds like we're in incredible agreement that the woke mind virus is a problem for the left. How come it hasn't been stamped out entirely yet? What's going on? Why have the reasonable economic leftists not ascended yet? Is it just a matter of time?
We have to
going on?
define what wokeism is. And that's actually a lot harder than it might seem.
Okay. How would you define woke?
I have a very elaborate definition of wokeism. I wrote an article of it on it.
What's the one-sentence summary?
Well, okay. I want to see how you define wokeism first.
I define woke, in some sense, it's good as a general term, and so defining it too tightly sort of defeats the purpose in a lot of ways. But, you know, extreme, it's sort of like far left. Like far left is a general term, but it does refer to a real phenomenon. To be more specific, I would say wokeism is the use of accusations of bigotry or bigotry or racism or whatever of some kind to silence discussion. That's probably the most practical manifestation of woke, right? I can't, everyone who I would consider woke on the left more or less does that, right? You can have left-wing beliefs about, being socialist or believing in systemic racism, and that inherently doesn't make you woke, thinking that the United States is systemically racist, because depending on how you define it, I could agree with that. But yeah, I think the most dangerous manifestation of woke is silencing others using accusations of racism, using victimhood, identity politics, stuff like that. Would you agree with that?
So I think you described a bunch of features of like a bunch of characteristics of progressive wokeism. The way I
Correct.
see wokeism, it's a style of politics rather than a content of politics, and it's not inherent to either the left or the right or extremes. I think this is how I define wokeism, as I trace it by the genealogy of the word itself. And no, not to the, oh, that was used by black power movements. I hate when people say that. They say, oh, it was used by radical black movements and it was co-opted. It's like, first of all, what radical Marcus Garvey? That's a very specific type of black politics,
Sure.
and that's very different from, Martin Luther King or the Black
Plus, yeah, plus
Panthers.
who cares where it came from? It's like the Nazis call themselves National Socialists. Are we not allowed to call ourselves socialists or even nationalists because of
Right.
that? It's like just
But I think
address the idea.
wokeism is a style of politics, and how this, if I were to give the one sentence definition of wokeism, it's a style of politics that presupposes that a person has to have the correct awakening to the correct ideas in order to build solidarity. So basically, wokeism is a style of politics that puts the awakening of a consciousness first. It's consciousness politics prior to a interest-based politics. That's why it's usually not class politics. Although you can have woke class politics, and it's happened before under Mao's China, for example, like in the Cultural Revolution when they started using class as an identity. Oh, you have a background that's like semi-bourgeois. Oh, you're a counter-revolutionary, that kind of
Right.
stuff.
You've been infected. Yes, you
Mhm.
and your children. Yeah.
But wokeism is ultimately, so it's not the idea of woke politics. It's not like, okay, me and you, let's say, imagine you're a Trump supporter and I'm like a leftist.
I don't have to imagine,
What if
but
we're
no, I'm just
both
kidding.
working class, we can prioritize issues that we have in common. But no, woke politics is about, no, you need to like become a leftist for me to unite.
Right.
So the leftist woke politics would presuppose that they would imagine a movement occurring by making everyone leftist. You know what example of right-wing wokeism is, which I think is the foundation of wokeism, is evangelical Christianity. I believe wokeism originates precisely actually in the first and second great awakenings.
This is
This is way back in the day.
it
Way,
runs along a similar line as like James Lindsay saying the woke right is, the evangelical Christians who use their Christian critical theory to say that our systems of power are really controlled by, the atheist materialist cabal, globalists, and they're suppressing Christianity and stuff. You're arriving there differently, or at least
kind of, but
calling
I'll
out the
say
evangelical movement.
Lindsay,
I can see
though,
it.
Lindsay is very particular in how he applies the term because, okay, self-marginalization is the consequence of woke politics. It doesn't work in a system where you need to win a majority of votes to get elected into power. So it's why the evangelical movement actually marginalized itself, and as it got more and more marginal and lost popularity, it got more and more extreme, and that would have like a feedback loop, and it getting
Yes.
smaller and smaller and smaller.
Interesting.
It's a lot like the woke. It's kind of like a virus, except if you look at the evangelical wokeism, I would say it's even more of a failure considering that they started off from a way stronger point in that they have way more financial backing, way more money, yet they still kind of fail to actually like really spread their ideology because
Sure.
if you look at evangelicals, what makes them different from Catholics or even just other Protestants? It's that you have to be a born again Christian. You have to come to the realization yourself. That's literally in its
Woke.
DNA. Woke. I mean,
You have to awaken.
when I made this connection first, when I was really wanting to look at everything that was written on wokeism on Z Library, I saw this book title written by a Christian that was called Awake But Not Woke. It was a critique of like left-wing wokeism, but she was saying, actually, we do need the awakening, the correct awakening,
Right.
Jesus Christ. And I'm thinking like, wait a second, the great awakening, the great awakening. And I like looked back and I looked at the style and the content of, I have I have a big interest in theology in general. So
Me too.
just kind of all the connections came together about like, oh,
Yes.
what, like this just makes sense. And because what holds all these things about, that we describe with woke progressive politics together? Cancel culture, political correctness, this obsession with etiquette, this this idea that you have to like have the correct views or else you're castigated. It's almost like a kind of
Yeah, it's a
original sin
religion.
without forgiveness.
It's almost like Jordan Peterson was correct when he said everyone is religious, because that's exactly what's happening here.
Ideological, right? Because I
Yeah,
think
sure. Well,
that's
two
where
words
the
for the same thing.
left wokeism is a little weaker because left wokeism, in this sense, it's like the ideology, the zealotry, but without the religion part, without the kind of binding. There's not much
Correct.
that
That's
binding.
actually, yeah. I think Tom Holland, not the actor, but the religious historian, says something to the effect of like socialism, or at least left wing moral sensibilities about equality, like extreme egalitarianism, everything must be equal, is basically Christianity, but without any of the traditions or the moral responsibility or anything, that binds it together. And so it's like it's a hobbled form of Christianity in some sense, which is interesting. But
Without forgiveness.
without forgiveness, that's yes,
But like
another
a
important
good
part.
thing, because you mentioned at the start, you said, this idea of policing language, cancel culture, and there's this obsession with identity. I mean, what holds that together? So if you presuppose your idea of politics is not like people of similar interests coming together based on those interests, you have the idea of the correct ideas. Well, if you believe that people need to have the correct ideas for there to be before there can be political change, then naturally the consequence of that's going to be policing, thought policing, thought control.
Correct. Yes.
That's
Right.
kind of
Right.
why these things like cancel culture emerge out of a woke politics naturally. So it's
Right.
not, like we have to look at the root. Some people will say, "Oh, we need to, you know, like woke is just a matter of presentation." But at the end of the day, you look at the way a lot of the leftists treat Trump supporters or anyone who's conservative. It's as if they're not even human. Like they're you can't even reach them. It's like,
Right.
oh, because I remember when leftists will say, oh, we can maybe bring socialism to the Democratic Party. I have this more radical idea, which is actually we should run socialist candidates in the Republican and Democratic Party. And if you look at the history of the two parties, it's not impossible, and that neither party is a left or right party historically.
So first off, it sounds like we agree
I dropped a lot of bombs there.
on a lot. No, that's fine. Why don't you simply then recognize recognize the authority and superiority of radical enlightened centrism and submit to the meme and just call yourself a radical enlightened centrist? Because clearly you're not a Trump deranged leftist, but you're also not a conservative, because you are a leftist and a socialist, which we'll talk about. Okay, so then you really are a radical enlightened centrist in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people are privately conservative, like small c conservative.
Yeah, well, I would say moderate social conservatism is just the norm. Like that's what normal social behavior is. Like, yeah, generally like monogamy is a good thing, and generally it's okay to care more about like your family and your own country than people from other countries. Like that's the soup in which we swim. And I would say that's just moderate social conservatism, which then is a question of like, well, how is that conservative in some sense, because there's still elements of like tolerance and liberal tolerance for all that. But yeah, so why don't you just submit to the meme and accept the superiority and dominance of radical enlightened centrism?
That's why I was super skeptical of you when I first heard of you. I remember they were like, this PF Young guy, whatever, like the time we met in person, and I was like, who the fuck's this? I didn't actually like check out your stuff. I just heard you're United, like a radical centrist, and I thought you were one of these like Jordan Peterson type of people.
Oh, I am one of those Jordan Peterson type. Jordan Peterson's the single most influential person on my thinking prior to him joining the Daily Wire. Oh, we found the next conversation topic.
I will say this: Jordan Peterson is not as bad as some lefties will say, but I think he totally sucks now. But even before,
I agree with you. He totally sucks.
I had like, one of my best friends back from high school who I stayed friends with throughout my college years. He he'd really like Jordan Peterson, and we'd bond over this. Like I like Jordan Peterson a little bit to some extent, but I never liked his politics because he would always weave in this weird stuff where he would try to justify inequality on the basis of lobsters, which I
that's
thought
so interesting, because I regularly cite the lecture of him explicitly explaining why wealth inequality is bad. Not just like poverty is bad, but relative poverty is the problem. So it's interesting. I mean, to be fair, I've watched many, many, many hours, so I have the advantage, I suppose. But go on, continue.
Were you
I
talking about
derailed you.
Oh yes, radical enlightened centrism. Okay, so yeah, I hate that because a lot of centrists are just defined by not learning about either side and kind of
Yeah,
presupposing a correct answer is somewhere in the middle without really looking at the things that they're claiming to be against. Whereas
yeah.
when we talked more, it came clear to me like, what do you mean by radical centrism? Correct me if I'm wrong. Sounds more like, not falling into a left-right binary or like a left-right idolatry rather than like centrism. Because still wouldn't say I'm centrist in any sense, but I would say like I'm critical of the right-left binary.
Sure. Well, it's really, first off, I'm tongue in cheek asking you, why do you not submit to radical enlightened centrist? I kind of hope other people don't identify with it. I kind of want the label for myself, and then I want everyone else to just, secretly identify as a radical enlightened. I don't want anyone to ruin the title, But yeah, the basic principle is the left has good ideas. They also have a lot of freaks. The right has good ideas. They also have a lot of freaks. And the neoliberal moderates like Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are not in a position to usher in the societal reforms that we need to be able to stop society from collapsing. So we have to take the best points of the left, rob them of their talking points, take the best points of the right, rob them of their talking points, and then be radical about uniting a, quasi, if not utterly, revolutionary movement that ushers in serious reforms, like, for example, a sovereign wealth fund, or, God forbid, stopping congressmen from trading stocks that they're legislating on. Like, you'd think it'd get done. You think it'd be done by now, but apparently there's not enough populist energy to move that forward. But, well, maybe we should just talk about where, because we're going to agree. We're going to agree on a lot.
I don't agree with what you just said.
We're both reasonable people. Well, hold on. Let me narrow down the
don't see it that way
we're both incredibly reasonable. Okay, well, hold on. Okay, all right. I'm curious then. What about that framing would you disagree with? What did I say in there that you think is wrong?
Well, you said the radical left has some good points and the right has some points.
Of course they do.
So the difference is I don't really think that there really is a left. I think we have liberals and you have people on the right. And even in the American context, I actually think only recently with the Trump phenomenon, you have a far right. But most of the Republican Party is still conservative liberals rather than real rightists. You see real rightists more in Europe than you do in America.
Sure.
But I do think there is a left. And the thing is, though, unlike the leftists who like to use the lack of a left on the mainstream to say that those are liberals, not leftists, to kind of, exonerate themselves for anything.
Yeah, right.
I actually think the real left is just as fucked, and that's why they're so marginal. The real left is fucked too, and we're just now kind of seeing it.
Who's the real left?
So I think the first left-wing candidate you've had in a very long time, since
Bernie.
Probably Jesse Jackson, was Bernie Sanders.
Okay, I would have voted for Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I mean, I still like Bernie Sanders. I think there's a lot of things I'm critical, of him on, but the left, right? Okay, so we should be clear how we define the left and right. The left is defined, defined historically. So I think, by the way, this binary is very non-helpful, especially.
Well,
I think since the 60s, the left and right binary is not very helpful when it comes to understanding.
Maybe can I tell you how I define it? Because maybe that helps better narrow down. Because maybe we don't disagree on this. The left and right are not characterized by policies. They're characterized by orientations towards the world. The left, their highest value, the thing they value most, is progress and transformation. The left looks at any given society and says, look at all this inequality, look at all this injustice, we need to do something to fix it. And what they prescribe as a solution might vary. Maybe it's tariffs one day and tariffs the other day, maybe whatever. But the general narrative, the orientation that they have is society has a lot of injustice in it, we need to address it. The conservatives' highest value is stability. They look at society and say, yes, there's all kinds of problems, but goddamn, look how much worse we could be, right? Look what society is doing for us. We don't want to break it apart. We don't want to, change things too much and then everything falls apart. Okay, so their highest value is stability. The radical enlightened centrist. And the conservative might
You
say,
forgot the biggest thing that differentiates the two things, which is equality and hierarchy. The left has
sure, yes. Oh, that's, yeah, yeah. I think that's another way to look at it.
the
Yeah,
left
yeah.
has a preference towards hierarchy. And in that sense, I'm a leftist, but on the progress thing, I'm actually kind of conservative.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so, but so the radical enlightened centrist, the highest value of the radical enlightened centrist is balance. We must balance progress and stability. And that's a constant, it's not like a particular set of policies, it's an orientation towards the world. Much like homosexuality.
But what if the pendulum is already tilted in a direction that is very, very unequal?
Right, then
Would you need to move more on a
exactly.
radical
In
left?
order to achieve balance, yes, often so. Often the discourse is very much one-sided or imbalanced. And so the radical centrist move is to go hard on the other side. That's partly why so many people accuse me of all of my right-wing beliefs or whatever, because I will argue with leftists, hey, the Trump supporters have a point about a crisis on the border, which every major Democrat, essentially admits at this point. Biden oversaw a crisis on the border.
Well, and
So,
they also deported more migrants than Trump did so far.
Oh, but yeah, certainly under Obama. Tom Homan was Obama's chief deporter in chief.
Trump hasn't even beaten Biden's numbers yet.
Sure, yeah. Well, so I'm sure given time, we'll see. But the point is, I get accused often of being right wing when in reality I see an imbalance in the discourse that is favoring the right wing, and I'm telling people, hey, if you just acknowledge that Kamala Harris sucks in a lot of ways, and the woke mind virus is real, then you can clean up your own side and mount a real challenge to the right, one that I would support. I would have voted for Bernie Sanders. And so the radical centrist is willing to take sides in order to bring balance to the discourse. And that makes you, Tony, because I know you're a smart guy and a good-looking guy too. You must be a radical centrist at the end of the day.
What does that have to do with being a centrist? Do we need physiognomy checks?
It's the fundamental determiner of radical centrism, is charisma and looks. That's all.
Interesting. Yeah, forget ideology. Yeah, it doesn't matter. That's the admission. We should just. Yeah. So what is the question?
Why? What do you disagree with in that formulation?
About
balance is the highest value.
I mean, I don't know. It depends. Not really.
Okay. How do you see it?
Well, it depends. Because I think, okay, so I think where we're similar is that we both see things in terms of contradictions, as opposed to like pure ideology. We see things in terms of contradictions. I think
Sure.
You want to look at a synthesis. You're trying to like synthesize things and solve contradictions that way.
To the degree that I understand Hegelian dialectics, I think I'm doing Hegelian dialectics.
However, but this is where people get wrong about dialectics. Hegel never advocated the synthesis. That's Fichte, who basically explained dialectics to Engels, and he went with it.
All right, I like Fichte.
But it's actually Hegel's whole thing is to go through contradiction. Contradiction never ends. You have to accept contradiction and work through it.
Amen. Okay.
So, like, I don't necessarily think everything requires a synthesis. We just have to recognize the contradiction and work through that. So, like...
Okay, what is the practical manifestation of that?
Well, it's a case-by-case basis, so it depends on the issue you're dealing with.
Sure.
I think a lot of times, for example, with the Zohan thing, Zohan Mamdani was elected.
The socialist Muslim mayor, or mayor-to-be.
Yeah, I like the guy. I like some of his policies. And the left was, very much celebrating that, and I think they should. However, there was this kind of AOC delusion all over again, where they're like, "We found a blueprint, guys," and I kind of wanted to point out, like, guys, this is a New York Democratic primary, and if you look at the data, he actually lost the vote of low-income people and people without college degrees, which for a socialist candidate is an abysmal failure. He won primarily by winning over a lot of immigrants and a lot of young people, which actually is a strategy for the left for a long time, and it's mathematically not sustainable.
Okay, interesting.
And it's the McGovern formula. The left has been failing.
Is that the new left?
The new left of the 60s,
Yep.
It's a fascinating phenomenon where, like, the left will have this buzz on college campuses. And because young people are very loud, very energetic, whenever they get a slice of victory, they talk about it like this is the movement, guys, but it's very self-referential. But when it comes down to the voting, they lose to the silent majority. I mean, this happened in with McGovern getting wiped out by Nixon because McGovern wrote off of the kind of momentum of the counterculture. And in France, after May 68, which every fucking leftist back then thought was going to be the next revolution, Charles de Gaulle even thought it was. Charles de Gaulle left the country. When he came back in 1969, the guy won a majority. Charles de Gaulle won a majority. People weren't fucking with that shit. That's the thing. The left is filled with young college students, and that's still the problem. Zohan won, great. I'm happy it's not him and not fucking Cuomo. But the left has not learned its lesson. It's still the same thing. And it's not, they say, oh, but that's liberals. No, 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 no. Anyone who has been outside of the world knows the stereotype of socialists, Marxists as well, rich college kids. As someone who went to grad school filled with communists, I can tell you that's true. Okay? It's a bunch of rich college kids. With some exceptions.
Okay, then let's get into where you and I might actually disagree, because it sounds like we're in total agreement right now. You are, and I don't never identify with this explicitly, but for the record, you are in the Enlightened Centrist tier list. Okay, you'll achieve high rankings there. So that puts you. No, never mind. I was gonna make a bad joke. Socialism. Communism. I think the socialists and the Marxists have a lot of good ideas, okay? Alienation of labor is a real thing. Marx was correct about that. Now, his entire concept of historical materialism is nonsense, right? The idea that religion is the result of class warfare or class contradiction. It's like religion is a very deep psychological phenomenon that, evolved over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, at least the proto-morality and precursors to religion. So that's just one, example of how the philosophy is wrong. But maybe we can practically get into like some of the economic prescriptions. Like, you do not believe in the abolishing of private property, do you?
No.
You do not believe that we should pursue as an end goal government ownership of like food production?
Well, that's the kind of thing. I mean, the idea of, first off, Marx didn't, I always have to clarify this because what Marx proposes is not as crazy as it sounds. It's just the question as to what do you replace it with. And I think the communists haven't really figured out a convincing answer. But like, it's not like he thought you couldn't own anything. He just thought that, you shouldn't be able to own stuff that is, you're basically profiting off of not doing shit. So you shouldn't be able to be a landlord. You shouldn't be able to be, if you're owning a business, you should own it with the people who work in it. Right. And then the end goal should be common ownership of some kind.
Sure.
The thing is about that, right? Like, I think there's a lot of things communism doesn't factor in, which is where for me, I'm pretty, I would say, solidly socialist. On the question of communism, it's so, for me, like a question of far in the future. I don't think it's desirable unless there was such a level of wealth which is, by the way, what Marx and Engels thought. You had to have the productive forces be very advanced before you could have communism. Mm-hmm. Anarchists believe communism can happen in the here and now. And some Marxists believe that too. Like, I mean, Maoists out of all the communist experiments were the only experiment to really try to build communism. And to me, that's not desirable at all. The idea of
it didn't really work out very well.
Well, yeah, but it's not, even if it worked well, which is, anarchists will tell you if you have an anarchist on, human society have been communist. Many Native American societies, many, societies historically. But I'm like, yeah, I don't want to live like that. There's also all kind of other inequalities people don't speak about in those kind of arrangements. Like I call it the school uniform paradox, which is when you make everyone the same, you actually conceal the most natural hierarchies.
Right. That's why everyone wore a uniform. That's why everyone The suit comes from Maoist China, I think, or at least the suit was popularized in Maoist China precisely.
Right. But what
because of that.
happens is that the people who are naturally more charismatic, better looking, bigger, will dominate more than they did than the people who could use more like ways to move up and down the ladder. Now that's a metaphor for me for a broader phenomenon that you see.
Wait, hold on, real quick. Explain that phenomenon, because if everyone is wearing like the same suit,
Well,
it eliminates the ability of like less attractive people to compete or something like that.
Yeah, well, this is a microcosm of a broader thing, which
Yeah.
I will say in communist systems that happens is you have the, as some native societies called, actually indigenous societies in Africa, called sorcerers would be a term they describe them. The people who are naturally charismatic would end up consolidating all the power in these very equal societies.
Mm.
It's kind of like Plato's critique of democracy, like pure democracy, where everyone votes on everything. It's actually the orator who becomes the new oligarch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Okay.
So this is the kind of thing about like this is a more sophisticated argument against communism than like I think Soviet Union bad. I mean, that's Soviet Union wasn't like communist; it was state socialist, right?
Sure.
A statist form of socialism, but it wasn't like classless, moneyless society. Now there's this weird phenomenon you'll find where communist parties often turn into cults, and cults have a communistic structure. Mm-hmm. So if you look at like Bhagwan,
families have a communistic structure. So
I don't know.
I
kind of, maybe not really. I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Well,
okay.
It depends what you mean by families. Because do you mean families
I mean nuclear family, like mom and dad and kids.
Really?
Yeah, they exert absolute tyrannical control, and everyone shares. And it is from each according to his ability, to each according to their need. Like the kids do not get different amounts of food at dinner time based on their grades or whatever. It's like everyone gets what they need, all their needs are met, and the tyrant, the tyrant in the technical sense, not in the pejorative sense, decides what happens for the whole family. So in that sense, it's communist.
That's an interesting argument. I haven't heard that one.
That's the Ben Shapiro argument. I'm communist with my family. I'm socialist with my neighbors. I'm conservative with my state, and I'm libertarian with my federal politics, or something like that. Which I think actually, it captures a real phenomenon. But anyway, continue.
I think the state is a microcosm of the family, in that the family.
How could it be a microcosm?
Not a microcosm. Sorry, the family is a microcosm of the state, and that the state is basically an attempt to kind of structure humans, but in a ideally semi-voluntary basis, and that it's voluntary insofar as we delegate authority or consent. Like consent is the big thing, but
sure.
At the end of the day, like the purpose of a state is to get people to do what they don't want to do but need to do, and that's what a family is until you're an adult. And that's why anarchists of anarchism, if you take it to its logical conclusion, tend to be for abolishing custody laws. I'm not kidding.
I know.
But if you take it to its conclusion, it's not like terribly inconsistent. But I think they're completely wrong. I think some level of hierarchy is foundational.
Listen, Tony, I always say
authority.
the only person.
Yeah.
I always say the only person dumber than a socialist is a libertarian. Okay, so don't worry. We agree on the libertarian foolishness.
Right.
But hold on. Okay.
Left libertarians or both?
Both of them. Liberty is not the highest value. It's a good value, right? But liberty is just that devolves into pure hedonism.
Yeah, you become animals.
Social deterioration. Yes, exactly. Okay, but so then what makes you a socialist? Because you're not for the abolition of private property. Well, so far you're just a leftist economic populist who can fit squarely into the eventual enlightened centrist takeover. So well done. You'll be a lieutenant in the final Revolutionary Guard. Sovereign wealth funds are cool. Taxing capital gains at the same rate as labor.
No,
what about you is truly socialist?
So there's a lot of things. I straight up think we should have hard limitations on how much private property we can own. I don't think anybody needs to own more than.
Are you for a wealth tax?
I think we should do way more. If you watch my video, the problem with taxing the rich is I think taxing the rich is too easy. It's very easy for them to escape that. I actually think we should straight up seize their property.
Seize the wealth.
No,
okay.
So this is where I'm a hard socialist. I think that there's no reason that people need to own more than 2 properties that unless they're using it as a to produce something. You should not be able to like own many properties as an investment. I think it's inherently stupid. I'm not the only one who thought
No
that.
landlords?
No landlords. Landlording is stupid.
Who owns the apartments?
So I think you should have an arrangement to get there. You're going to have a mixture of private and public. But at the end of the day, I think we should have public housing, strive for mostly public housing. And you can
Oh,
have
God.
how it is now, though, is I think you can have private housing, but public housing will compete with the private market and more at the level of ownership. Because look, how do we fix the issues? I don't think it's a problem of we should just only do public housing. Let me clarify. It's more so like how do you get housing to be more affordable and how do you have less inequality? Well, the root cause of inequality is the property ownership. I think you should have limitations. So that's where I don't believe that, owning even like a home and a vacation home is bad. Like, in Cuba, they even allow you to do that. Surprises some people. Now,
I'm going to have to retract my statement about appointing you as a lieutenant in the Enlightened Centrism. I'm going to do a Stalinist officer purge, and remove the socialists who are for seizing wealth. I'm for seizing corporate assets, like half of the Harvard endowment to pay off student loans.
Most people don't own more than 2 properties, dude. Like that's the kind of thing. Most people don't own.
Sure.
Look, if you want to be generous, you could say 3. There's also, I'm sure, there's all kind of loopholes some rich people will go through, which is that they'll have like a house for their kids that they buy, but their kids live in it, so it doesn't count. That will all probably happen. The point is we shouldn't be able to like have a system where rich people can just buy properties and like not live in them and just like collect rents without doing nothing. It's kind of insane.
Okay, maybe this is, like I said, nobody hates libertarians more than I do. However, there are basic economic principles that I think we can't override. First off, I will say I agree, because what the immediate libertarian rebuttal is, who are you to say what's enough wealth? Tony, you have nice camera, nice food. You can play an Xbox. Like, compared to a starving child in Africa, who are you to say what the limit of wealth is? And I would say there is some truth to that, of like who decides fundamentally what's enough at the end of the day. But the idea that we therefore can't because we can't say what level of wealth is appropriate, it's as if the concept of opulence or decadence or excess does not exist. It's like, just because we can't lay out a specific line of how much wealth is too much wealth doesn't mean we can't say that owning 7 yachts and paying slave wages to Amazon employees that have to get subsidized by fucking welfare so that Jeff Bezos can pay for his yachts or whatever, like, that's too much. That's insane. That's hedonism. That's degenerate.
I think we should have banned yachts.
Maybe. I mean, there's
this is where I'm not like a liberal. I would say I'm a pluralist and not a liberal.
I am sympathetic to some ideas like for example, seizing half of the 50 billion or 50 trillion. No, it's 50 billion, obviously, not 50 trillion. $50 billion endowment from Harvard, seize half of it and offer some level of student loan forgiveness, that the government gave people money, lended people money to pay for Harvard's product, and Harvard was not on the line for it at all. It's the housing crisis all over again. Government loans you money, or we loan people money, but they get none of the risk for, I'll sell you a product that you'll go $100,000 into debt for, and if you can't pay it back, I still get the money. Fuck that. Restorative justice, whatever social justice term you want to use, seize the endowments. Also, walk into Facebook and Facebook's headquarters, point a gun at all of them and say, show us your algorithm right fucking now. Twitter makes the algorithm transparent. There's all kinds of stuff that we could do to corporations that say, make it transparent. I don't give a shit about all these libertarian, but it's private property. It's going to reduce competition. I don't give a fuck.
Libertarians are right about that, in the sense that the system we're in, which is a capitalist system, is you have private property rights that makes it very difficult for the government to actually do these things.
I agree. Fuck that. Let's be revolutionary. There's a bunch of
loopholes you can get around. That's where I would say I'm a hard socialist.
And that's where that's the radical part of me.
Yeah.
I agree. But no, you take it too far.
No, where I say I'm not for abolishing all private properties, because the problem with that is it gives such an excuse for a government to go clamp down on anybody.
Sure.
And look, I don't think owning a farm, even if you're technically having someone there work who's getting paid less than you, I don't think that's bad. Like, farmers are, not a problem. They're a good thing. and they often miss me with the kind of idea that like collective farming is a failure. Like that is just
I can hear the degree to which you've argued with communists about this so much, because
Oh, yes.
only a communist would be like, the farmers are the problem here or whatever. They're the real fucking I mean, big ag is a real problem. Don't get me wrong.
I've been called like petite bourgeois socialist, but it's like,
Of course, yes.
sure, but you know what? I actually
could-
think the petite bourgeois, which was the original kind of bourgeois, because the original bourgeois was the middle sort who made the first wave of
small business,
Enlightenment
middle class.
revolutions. That was great. I mean, you know, when
Yeah.
Marx is critiquing, when he critiques bourgeois culture, his critique is that it is contradicted by capitalism, not that bourgeois culture is capitalism. This is something that a lot of commies get totally wrong because they don't really read Capital. They just read the thing he wrote when he was very young and didn't publish, the German ideology, and take certain quotes out of context. But Marx, his whole thing is that he was a Republican, and he saw the 1844 revolutions when all the liberals just defended private property and went against the working class in the social question, which the social question was what drove the 1844 revolutions, and that's where the words socialism and social democracy come from. You know, it's like the social question was inequality that arose out of like, you know, the rise of like huge wealth disparities, exploitation, bad worker conditions. Because, you know, the early days what the bourgeois revolutionaries envisioned was pretty great. Like, it just never happened because capitalism didn't work like that. But like Jefferson, for example, believed in somewhat of a one-class society. That's going to be hard to manage.
Interesting. Okay.
Jefferson's idea, I mean, you know, you've had historians literally describe his vision as a one-class society. So like Jefferson's idea was everyone owning a bit of property. In his case for property was that it gave economic independence to prevent tyranny. And actually, I still believe in this idea, which is why for me, the ideal is not the government owning everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should be able to own their own shit. I'm a big gun proponent too, like gun rights, civil. In some ways, this the libertarian part of me, you know.
Yeah.
But
wow, it's like you're synthesizing so many different perspectives. It's very radically centrist of you.
But the problem is when you have like too much inequality, that means that now it's not just the government that's the source of tyranny. It's also private tyranny, corporate tyranny.
Yes. So you got to do something about it.
And you get state capture. And
I
all
guess
that.
I'm more sympathetic to the solution of, look, you need markets. Markets are very powerful.
I agree.
So let's just have sovereign wealth funds and like
capitalism and markets aren't the exact same.
Yeah, market socialism is, you know, I don't care what the label is. Like, fine, as long as we're getting the radical centrist synthesis of both capitalism and socialism, fine. But like, it's instead of seizing like individual property, I think you can do it for entities on like a one-off basis. Like I said, Harvard or the social media companies and, you know, maybe even AI companies, or even like taxing speculation. Like, how about fuck you? You don't get to charge a 1 cent fee on every transaction, or the government will do it and whatever. It's like, oh, but it prevents free cash flow. It's like, look, at a certain point, you don't need the amount of quote unquote innovation that we have in society. I'm actually fine stagnating innovation. When Klarna came out with new ways, AI. But when Klarna specifically came out with new ways to go into debt to pay for DoorDash, on paper, that's innovation. I go, no, this is bad. Whatever we could have done to stop that, like from a government perspective, I would have considered a net positive actually. But the libertarian mindset is like, but consumers want to pay for it and consumers are rational, It's like nonsense. Okay? So I believe in that. But the problem is, as soon as you start seizing billionaire wealth, then it's like, then it is the guillotine people who end up taking it. Like, you eventually will get the wall if you go down this route.
That's the thing. How should that distribution occur?
Yeah, right.
How I believe
you view it.
For example,
only the rich white male landowners get to decide. How about that?
This is where I'm a democratic socialist, in this sense.
Okay.
That. Whoa! I just got my alarm. Just went off there.
You're good.
Cut that out, I guess.
The audio cancellation is very good on this.
Fantastic. Okay, so when it comes to a lot of industries that are not very big, like businesses that are not big, I think, you know, quite simply, the people who do the work can run it. And you'll still have hierarchies. You'll still have managers. But the difference is that managers will work like how friend groups, fraternities, and most religious organizations work, which is you vote the leader in. You know, you'll have a manager, you'll have a director, but you vote them in. And naturally, people who work at a
Oh,
place, naturally, people who work at a place will have an idea as to who is competent in running it.
ooh, okay.
You know?
So you believe in like cooperatives and all that?
Yeah, cooperatives, collectives, WSDs, worker self-directed enterprises.
All right,
Now,
we're gonna have to
companies that
argue
are way
here.
too big, I actually think should be full-on publicly owned, ones that have natural monopolies. Like, for example, anything to do with owning the electricity,
Uh-huh.
owning, natural resources. I
What
even think
about like
Amazon.
X, Amazon?
I think X should like stuff like X, the issue with stuff like social media is it needs to be broken up to begin with, and I think it should be. You can have. I think Yanis Varoufakis has good ideas on this, which is how do these companies actually make money? It's very odd. They make money from the consumer, so the
Correct.
solution with distribution is actually more to the consumer than the producers there. So it's like
Sure.
it really should be like you get paid to have your data be exploited if you want that.
True. Yeah. And we need,
The
like I said, we
digital
need a,
wealth fund, as he calls it.
yeah, something like that. And we also need a digital bill of rights as well to make
Big
sure that
fan
we,
of that. I like
yeah.
that you use that term. I've been using that term for a while. Digital
Yes,
right.
digital bill of rights. Okay, now here we can have a very concrete argument. Because like I'm in favor of like breaking up monopolies, like more aggressive usage of antitrust law. I think that would be like the radical centrist perspective is like hardcore use of the antitrust law without fundamentally upending our economic system entirely.
All. Do you think all monopolies are bad though? I think some
No, there's
monopolies are
natural
better
monopolies.
as monopolies.
Yeah, of course. It's a natural monopoly, like the telecom companies. You need them all setting up cell phone towers, and you
But
can't have
some,
small businesses launching satellites into space.
but sometimes a company just becomes a monopoly because it's genuinely just the best at doing what it does. Like in the sense that I
Sure.
think so. China figured out this capitalism, socialism synthesis when it comes to this one question. I think China. There's a lot of things I don't like what China does. On this question, it's quite interesting, which is that it allows for competition, and once it's clear that there's which players are the best at doing what they do, the state will back them up and effectively make them kind of like merge with the state and
Interesting.
controlled by
Okay.
the state, which wouldn't be a bad thing if China was democratic, which it's not. It's
Right.
not
Well,
democratic. So it's not
Elizabeth.
really beholden to the public. It's public ownership, state ownership. It's not public ownership.
Well, but this is why I like the idea of like the sovereign wealth fund. Is like Elizabeth
Well,
Warren proposed.
that's important though, because like, look, Amazon. Would Amazon be better if it was broken up? I don't think so.
No, but you could definitely break off Amazon Web Services from.
No, because that's how it makes money. It provides services at such a cheap price because
Yeah, but okay.
AWS. Unless you
Yeah,
want to nationalize AWS, then that would change the whole equation. But yeah.
maybe. But
Which
like,
I guess, like, look, there's the thing about these proposals is they could look very differently depending on like how much nationalization you want to do versus how much antitrust you want to do.
yeah, right. But it's all a balance. It's not strictly ideological. But here's a theoretical issue we can get into, which is cooperatives versus corporations. I'm okay with a corporate structure. If cooperatives were better, they would have outcompeted the corporations, but they haven't.
Sometimes they
Why?
do. That's actually a leftist critique of cooperatives. Is sometimes you have cooperative corporations like Mondragon in Spain,
Yep, I've heard of this.
and some like radical left critiques will say, well, they're just doing capitalism, but the workers get rich. And I'm thinking, cool,
Yeah, that's fine.
fair. Like I'm not against like some inequality. Like this is where I'm not like a hard like absolute communist.
Good.
I think
All right. The more you walk
you're-
back from that edge, the better.
you're going to get inequalities no matter what. It's just we should pick and choose. Like we shouldn't have too much inequality, and we should also have hierarchies that actually make sense for human evolution, ones that aren't like static and degenerate.
Yeah.
This is an important thing because earlier I mentioned like how the this little point I'd never really elaborated on because
Go
it's
ahead.
actually a very big critique of like communism, which is how cults have a communist structure and how communist parties become cults. Well, you do see this tendency. A lot of communist parties become cults, like they revolve around one guy. It's a notorious thing among all of them, like Trotskyist parties, Marxist-Leninist parties, Maoist parties, which are actually more democratic ideologically than the other ones are, but same thing happens. Under cults, there's actually this communistic structure, but a cult leader ends up just like becoming the guy who runs shit. Like okay, good. Beck Vaughn,
Bhagwan, yeah, in
Yeah,
Oregon.
the guy who's said democracy is for the people,
Yes,
but
but
the
the
people
people.
are,
Yes, that guy. Yes,
that
I
guy.
love that cult. That cult. That 4 episode. It's called Wild Wild Country, I believe, on Netflix.
It's so good.
Phenomenal.
People should watch it because he
Oh my
basically
god.
said, we want a communistic structure, somewhat, but it's a cult, and it's, you'd always tell everyone like we're all equal, but it's like, are they really? No,
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 of
they're
course not.
not. And that's the kind of thing about like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, there was that, but on a kind of big government level, where it was the bureaucracy was just the kind of
Hmm.
hierarchy.
Hmm.
So it's, plenty of people have pointed this out. This is nothing new. Back to the point about what is the basis for socialism. If you're a communist, you essentially believe either that equality of outcome is good, if you're an anarchist of sorts. If you're a Marxist, Marxists don't actually believe in equality of outcome. They believe that a stateless, classless society of abundance is one that will lead to the most human potential. And they want to overcome the division of labor so that, as Marx, famously says, you can fish in the evening, write in the night, do this. The idea is like not to be bogged down into one thing.
Hmm.
I think that sounds like, for me, that's a maybe. I don't think that's like possible right now. I don't really envision that. Maybe, but for me, the rational basis of socialism is fundamentally way more Christian than it is Marxist, in the sense that for me, humans are fundamentally actually bad. I believe in the doctrine of original sin.
Mm.
So socialists tend to think, oh no, human nature is great, or it's like naturally egalitarian,
Yeah, very
and that,
Rousseauian.
yeah, like, yeah, Rousseau or even like Chomsky will believe that humans are actually naturally kind of communistic and egalitarian, but we're brainwashed by capitalism and hierarchy and conditioned. Marxists are kind of like, there isn't really human nature. It changes, and depending on where you live. I think I'm more inclined to that. However, I actually think there is transhistorically a human nature, like some aspects of human nature that persist no matter what society you're in. One of them is corruption by power. No matter what society you're in, people who become too powerful and too rich become evil degenerates. They become evil or
The
degenerate,
archetypes,
one of
yes.
them.
Yes.
And look, this is actually Machiavelli's. He doesn't have the word socialism is not in the world. It's not in the vocabulary back then. But Machiavelli in the discourses makes a very sophisticated argument as to why you should have, like, you should, as he says, keep the citizen poor but the society rich. Now, back in his society, it was much like less wealthy, so I don't think it would have to be that way. Like everyone be poor, but in the sense that I don't think anyone should be too rich, because being too rich means too powerful, and when you get the money, you got the power. And when you got the power, the Scarface line. But like,
The
wait,
Italians should run
the
everything.
the real thing is that I think, what is the use of having people own so much money and power? I mean, at a certain point, it is very bad for human evolution. And it's bad not just for the people who are exploited to get that kind of power, it's bad for those people who have that power themselves.
Hmm.
Look at rich kids. Rich kids this is why I don't believe, religion's the opium of the poor only. No, like rich people, they have money, yet they are so desperately in need of some kind of religious structure or something, because rich people have some of the most meaningless lives. They'll be fucked in the head, have so many mental illnesses. It's insane. And you also
Not more than poor people. I mean, being rich does assuage you of a lot of that, and probably on average, rich people are probably better off in all of those respects than poorer people. But it still affects the rich. No, rich people are not immune to
yeah.
getting cheated on, or a family member dying, or getting sick with some terminal genetic disease. It's like suffering is universal. That's for sure.
And like, I mean, it's a kind of common sense, but we don't act as if it's common sense. But I think it's common sense in that a lot of people will be like, yeah, that's probably true, which is like, absolute power corrupts. I mean, it's why I don't believe in dictatorship under really any case, in the sense that I think even it's rare to get a good dictatorship. And when you do, it is rare that they will continue being a good dictator. And when they die, you'll more likely get a bad one, because it's only a matter of time before people are corrupted by power. It's just the way it is.
Hmm.
And
I agree. This is
Yeah,
this is
that's
archetypal
my case. And it's
human
all
nature.
that moralistic, whatever. That's where I break from Marxism. But
Oh my God.
it's fundamentally, I think, a more powerful basis for socialism. It's not that like human nature will be perfect under this, classless, stateless society. It's rather that like, nah, it's when you have too much wealth inequality, you just become, a degen. I really believe in a critique of degeneracy, by the way.
I say degeneracy all the time. I get accused of, that's partly why people accuse me of being right wing, is because I use degenerate all the time. It's like,
You're like
dude,
Trotsky. Trotsky uses the word degeneracy
nice.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So does Che
Degeneracy,
Guevara. Che
yeah, just
Guevara
means,
used the word
yeah,
degeneracy a lot.
yeah. I called my alcoholic fraternity brothers degenerate. I don't mean it in the, I will call, the extreme gay LGBT shit degenerate, but I'll use that same label to describe people that just go sleep around with everybody and just follow their dick and have no, sense of, I don't know, responsibility to withhold their hedonistic, degenerate desires. But anyway, we're at an hour. I think we can wrap up here. Any final points that you want to make?
Damn, we were just getting started.
To my radically enlightened centrists. Oh, this is just part one of what I'm sure can be many more conversations. Any final points you got? Any message to the radical centrists that are watching this? It's mostly Destiny fans. There are no radical centrists that watch me.
Destiny fans. Oh boy.
Yeah, it's mostly Destiny fans and FD Signifier fans.
FD Signifier fans. Interesting.
The answer can be no.
Oh,
too.
okay. I should probably plug my stuff. Okay, so
yeah, I'll put all your descriptions.
So I have video essays, and if it wasn't clear, I definitely come from the world of Marxism. I'm very well versed in that kind of thing. It's why I have a love-hate relationship with it. My upcoming videos, one of them's explaining just Marxism, but in a very interesting way. No, this is the labor theory of value. No, it's like Marxism is like the story.
Yeah, not autistically, schizophrenically, with good vibes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next video after that is explaining every type of Marxism. So just from Leninism all the way to fucking liberation theology. It's Christian Marxism. I go all across the board. But if you like conversations like, P.F. Chang's, you'll like One Dime Radio. The One Dime Radio is really just for making leftists less dumb. And the main channel is really for everybody. I would say everybody who's curious. Everybody who's curious. The pod, I started it to be left critical from a person who's more left wing than they are right wing. And that's the only reason why I stay on the left. I don't like the label, but it's just because I look at the right and I'm like, damn, this is even worse. This is a lot worse than the left. I don't want to be here,
That's fair. Well, maybe the next time we can talk about the problems with the right, because we skewed a little bit to the problems with the left. That's fine. I want the left to win.
I can tell you about how the left in some ways is more capitalistic than the right. But that's a whole other conversation.
That's fair.